Hey everybody, welcome to the second day of week number 4. We have elements of the staff. So in part number 1, day number 1, we touched base on the various different types of rhythms that you are using. We're going to talk about using those rhythms a little bit more, how we would put those on the staff, what makes up the staff, what elements of the staff we're going to be using here. So let's dig in. The first thing we're going to touch base on here is something called a measure. So in music, a measure is a small unit of time. So make sure you remember that right there, folks. Measure is a small unit of time. Measures are inside those red boxes right there. Now, in real music, you're not going to have red boxes showing you where the measures are. This is just done to highlight where they are for the purposes of this screen recording so you can learn. So the measure is where the different types of notes and rhythms are going to be. That's where they're going to go, and that's how we're going to separate music into those manageable little pieces of time. The measure exists between two vertical lines outlined in blue right there. Those are called bar lines. And what bar lines do is they separate the music into measures. So it makes it so that it's a little bit easier to look at. Rather than having a big, long string of notes and rhythms, we are going to have smaller pieces that are easier to digest. It's very similar to when you're reading a book. If all the letters were mashed together, could you figure out what the words were? Probably. Is it a whole lot easier with spaces and punctuation and all those different things in there? Absolutely. So the bar lines are functioning like those spaces inside your books. They're helping us to see the measures and perform them a little bit more clearly. So within each measure, there are a set number of beats. And using that number of beats, we can add elements of rhythm to the measure in order to create music. So inside of the first measure, it's going to have something called a clef. The clef is outlined in green right there. The clef is going to tell us about the overall sound of each pitch. We don't need this at this time. We're focused more on rhythm. Pitch is going to be a little bit different. So I wanted to introduce this right now, but we will dig more into that in the coming weeks here. So in addition to the bar lines and clef, the first measure of each section is going to contain something called a time signature. And time signatures are outlined in purple right there. The time signature is going to tell us two very important things. The first is the most important thing that the time signature tells us, and that is the number of beats that are in a measure. That goes for the entire song unless the time signature changes. For our purposes right now, the time signature is going to stay the same, so it's going to tell us what number of beats are going to be in the entire song that you're performing. And then the second thing that it says is the rhythmic element we count to reach that number. Now that can be a little bit confusing. We're going to discuss that in just a second. So, as mentioned before, time signatures tell us two very important things. Can you remember what they were? If you do, that's awesome. If you didn't, they are the number of beats in the measure, which is the top number, and the rhythmic element that we count to reach that number, which is the bottom number. So the most common time signature is 4/4. So that's how we say that, 4/4. You can see that there, it's the first one. And it contains two fours that are sitting right on top of one another. It represents 4 beats in a measure, and using the quarter note to count the number of beats. Now, for our purposes, we don't really need to worry about the bottom number. We're not going to be too concerned with how we get there. We're just going to focus more on the fact that the top number is going to tell us the number of beats in a measure. Please remember that the bottom number is important too, but the top number is what we really need to focus on. Now, some of you are probably thinking at this point, why is this important? Why do we need to know this? We're talking about rhythm. Why do we need to know about the things on the staff? So that's a very good question and a very valid question. And one thing I like to do is to explain to you why I'm teaching you things. It's not just because I said so and you have to do it. There is a very important reason that we need to know these things. Knowing the different elements of rhythm will help you to understand what you're seeing when you look at sheet music. Now, in this class, we don't just do all rote teaching. Rote means that I would say it and then you would say it back to me. We use real music, real sheet music with notes and rhythms and all the different things that we're talking about right now in the course of this class. So, without knowing what any of these things are, you can't really make sense of the music. To kind of draw an analogy here, music is a language, just like Spanish or English or Polish or whatever it is that you know how to speak or you've heard spoken before. To understand the language, you absolutely must know what pieces make it up, which is why in reading we talk about verbs and nouns and adjectives and all of those different sorts of things that are going to be part of language. To understand music, we use the musical notation appropriately. We have to know all those different parts as well. This allows us to have intelligent conversations with one another as musicians, and plus, it's pretty fun to learn a new language, isn't it? So let's put this all together. The first thing we're going to do is start with the staff. And the staff is where the pitches and rhythms are going to be placed. It consists of 5 lines and 4 spaces. The lines and spaces are numbered from the bottom to the top, as you can see right there. We start with the number 1 for both lines and spaces. The lines are listed there in blue. The spaces are in that kind of pale green color. We always go from bottom to top. That'll come into play a lot more when we go into pitch in a few weeks. So to construct a measure, we need to add the elements of music in a very specific order. So first things first, with a blank staff right there, we are going to add our clef. The second thing that comes in the measure is going to be the time signature. Now remember, when we're adding these things in there, this is not in every single measure. The clef doesn't go in every single measure. It goes in the first measure, the same with the time signature. But now we also need to end that measure. So then we add the bar line, which is added after adding pitches and rhythms. So one thing to keep in mind, you do not need a bar line between your time signature and the start of your measure. The bar lines are just there to separate completed measures. And when you have the clef and the time signature, that is not a complete measure. That is the setup for it. That is the beginning of whatever song it is that you are starting to work on. So the bar line right there comes after you've added in pitches and rhythms. So now, folks, we've got another video to watch. We're going to mark this part of the lesson complete and head over to the next video where we're going to get a little bit of practice on how to do all of this.